Hello and welcome back for episode 16 of our KSP Let's Play, where I am finally going to stop procrastinating and we are actually going to begin the process of putting a base on Minmus. However, the reason I was procrastinating so much is because I don't like just slapping really simple things together. I like just having fun and designing stuff. So there was a many man hours of design and testing and everything else just for even these two missions that you're about to see in this episode. And I imagine the base is going to be just as bad. For instance, the rover took me about 6 hours to design and fully test to make sure everything was going to work before I actually did the recorded mission. So it's a big time commitment, and yeah, I'm finally gonna stop procrastinating on it though, and we're gonna go out there now. First thing that we need to deal with is if I'm going to be putting a base there, I also want to turn it into a mining base. So we want it to be doing mining. And if we're going to be doing mining, there's a couple things I need to do before we actually go and set a base down, and that is I need to do an orbital survey of Minmus so that we know where the ore spots are. Then I'm also probably going to land a bunch of probes to basically check the actual surface data of those mining spots and see what's best. And then I figured what I would do is actually send a rover out there that will begin mining now and will be fully capable of creating a bunch of fuel and having a bunch of fuel tanks and everything else, and be able to drive around, which will be fun. But mainly because the mission that we have to send a Minmus base, or to set up a Minmus base, requires 6,000 units of fuel. So it's going to make my life a lot easier if I don't have to worry about trying to send 6,000 units of fuel with the actual base. And what we'll do is this episode, we will send a rover that, while I design the base and actually send the base out there, will actually be mining us ore to turn into fuel. And he will hopefully have about 6,000 units of fuel, if not more, by the time that we actually get out there with the base, and we can just worry about the other requirements. And I should briefly mention that we're going to break tradition here, and there's actually not going to be a live mission this episode. It's just both these missions are just going to get post-commentary, just because we're going to Minmus and just doing Minmus landings, and we've seen that lots already. So other than just hitting some keynotes that are different, we are just going to do a post-commentary, and it should save a ton of time in this episode, because both these missions are fairly lengthy in time, and doing a post-commentary is a good way to crunch them down into a very small time frame and save you viewing time. So, without further ado, before we get into the first mission here, I gotta go do some science stuff, which basically means upgrade some buildings and buy some science. So we're gonna go on a massive spending spree here. Right, so the first order of business was to upgrade buildings. So you can see here I'm upgrading the R&D building so we get access to the final tier of parts. And then I also upgraded the mission control center just so we have unlimited contracts, and also the launch pad just because it's cheap and it made it look better. There's no other reason than that. So we got those, and then I came in and bought some science stuff. So I grabbed the nuclear engines first off. I don't actually need them at all this episode, but they're just a good thing to have around. They're really useful. And then obviously we needed to grab all our mining stuff, so this will give us the drills, all the survey equipment, and the ore tanks, which we're going to need all of that. As well as I grabbed the larger batteries, because if we're going to keep this thing running through the night, we're going to need a ton of stored battery power in order to keep everything running. And I just also grabbed some extra plane parts, because I thought I was going to make a plane. I never actually did, but I ended up using them on the rover, so cool. That was fun. So we grab plane parts, but we're not going to use it for a plane. We're going to use them as a rover. And so that was about all that we needed from that. So we're just going to jump straight out to the launch pad here, because I've already designed this sucker. And we are going to begin our scout mission, which is launching a pancake to space. Actually, I'm just kidding. We're not actually launching a pancake to space, but it kind of looks like it because that fairing is ridiculously huge. But it's because they're a scout mission. It's a polar sat that's going to take the orbital survey, and then it's also got 4 probes on it that are going to go land in the 4 highest concentration areas to take surface readings. And it made it fairly bulky, so it just took a ridiculous fairing to actually house everything. And it kind of keeps it as a surprise of what's under the fairing. So, otherwise it was a fairly typical launch. I'm doing an SSTO launcher, so it's going to get us up to orbit, and then it's actually going to return and land near KSC for a full refund. and the rest of the vessel will just carry on towards Minmus. So it's kind of poetic justice that just as we were coming into the night side is when I actually ditched the fairing, so you still can't really see what's going on too well, but we ditched that because we were finally in space and deployed our solar panels. And then a little bit of time warp and a couple farts of the engine, and we had our orbit. So we kicked off our satellite, and then I basically just did the same plot that we used last time we went to Minmus. So did about 930 dV, and then just checked our alignment just to make sure we'd be able to get an intercept, and everything looked relatively good. So we went ahead with our burn and got our trajectory to Minmus, well, below Minmus, and then plotted out our correction burn, I guess it'd be called. Now, one thing I should mention that in order to do a orbital survey for ore, you do have to be on a polar orbit. So we do have to come in and actually get into a polar orbit, which you can see I'm doing here. And once we had that, we fired our burn, which came nowhere close. So I ended up having to just manually tweak it in just by using the two nodes that I knew would move it. And skipped a bunch of the tweaking, but this was our end product, and we were now on our way to Minmus. So while that guy began his journey, we flipped back over to our launcher, and when I got here, it was actually right where I needed to do my burn, so I just cowboyed it and didn't even bother plotting a maneuver. I just fired the engines and took a rough stab at it. And this time I remember to put in the solar panels and turn off the fins. However, I'm going to leave the entire re-entry in because this time it actually was exciting. You can see here we got all kinds of temperature warnings going off, and things started to go bad right about here. And yeah, there we go. And our engine exploded. Kind of sucks because that's 15k that just exploded, but I was too lazy to actually go and do it again, even though I had a quick save right before I came back down. But we just kind of went with it, so I just deployed all the parachutes and brought it down. And then the second thing happened. You can see there, I was just seeing how far we actually were from KSC. I think it was like 20 kilometers or something. But once we hit the water, I was procrastinating in hitting recover, and it started to tip, and you can see the one tank exploded and all the parachutes came off. However, I was able to recover them all from the water. So we got pretty much everything back except the engine. And then we just headed back out to our other vessel, which was still days away from Minmus, so we just time warped everything, time warped it out to the SOI, and then performed our break, which actually put us into a really wonky orbit, and I did actually fix it, but I just edited it out because there's no point in me showing that. And then I also had a mission to transmit science from Minmus orbit, so I just quickly sent air back to knock that mission off, and then we finally deployed our scanner, and then I cranked up the cutoff on it so that it would only show us the richest spots. Took a quick look around, and you could see the brightest pink was over on the dark side there, which is completely inaccessible for us right now. So I basically just hit time warp, and we did a bunch of circles, a bunch of orbits, took like 3 or 4 orbits, and finally that heavy pink area was underneath us. So we were able to finally launch our first probe, which was actually really annoying because I forgot to turn off crossfeed on some of the docking ports, so a few of the tanks actually drained, and I ended up having to refuel them. But I also couldn't ignite the engines through the staging sequence, which was also really annoying. But nothing mission critical, so we just carried on, and I grabbed one of the probes that had a full tank, and turned on all the engines, and then we undocked it and just gave it a little push to get it away. And then I plotted a maneuver to do our first test landing, which is actually going to be in the flats here. And unfortunately, after I did the burn, the entire landing's at night. So I'm just going to completely skip to when we're landed, right about here. And then I just time warped it to the daytime so you could actually kind of see what was going on. So we took a surface scan real quick, and then we actually activated our scanner and took a peek around, and you'll notice there is a 12% concentration here, which is actually really good. And not only that, but it looks like it's literally the entire flats. Like it didn't really matter where I clicked on the map, which you can see here. It's just 12% absolutely everywhere. So I'm pretty sure this is where we're going to end up building our base, but I still have 3 more probes, so we might as well do some more test landings just for the heck of it. And so yeah, we'll jump back up to our craft here. So once we're back up here, I didn't. Well, I think there was one probe that still had fuel, but two of the probes didn't have fuel, so I went about and refueled them. And while they're refueling, I should mention that that orbital scanner is going to get left up here forever as kind of just like a satellite dish. So you'll notice I put a bunch of relay satellites on it because being that it's on a polar orbit out at Minmus, I figured I could just kind of, since it's going to be stuck out here, use it as kind of a comm network link. So at least now we actually have some comms out at Minmus on a polar orbit. So we finished refueling and undocked ourselves, plotted a maneuver again, and this time we're shooting for the top of that plateau there, which is just west of the flats that we landed in last time. So we got ourselves oriented, fired our engines, got our trajectory, and this time there was actually some sunlight. So I've left part of the landing in here, and you can see I was actually, when I was coming down, I was going to kind of miss the plateau that I was shooting for. I was going to come down on the slope of it. So I did a kind of a last minute correction, which you'll see right about here, just to kind of nudge us back over and get us up onto that plateau so we can take our scans and readings up there, because there's no way I'm building a base on a slope. So if anything, it's going to be on the plateau, so I want to be up there when I take the scans. So we just came in for a nice gentle landing, and we obviously don't have landing gear, but I did build some with struts, so they're taking the brunt of the hit. And we did another surface scan, activated our scanner, and kind of took a look around, and we had about anywhere from 7 to 10% depending where you clicked. So still a good deposit area, but it's no 12% that those flats were. So yeah, so we just jumped back up to our mothership, undocked our probe, and just for shits and giggles, I actually activated the scanner while we were still in flight to see what that was all about, because I haven't had a lot of experience with these scanners, so I was kind of just experimenting too. But otherwise, a rehash, plot a maneuver, execute a maneuver. However, I did leave the ship. I left this one in just because I thought it was fun when I fired the engines here, how the ship just goes like shooting off and leaves the probe behind. But so yeah, I just came down for another landing, which is pretty uneventful. And these probes are basically, they're just a couple of ant engines, a probe core, and I don't think I even gave it batteries, just because it's completely circled with solar panels, and it honestly doesn't even really need that much power. But yeah, this spot was about 7 to 10% again too, depending where you clicked. I should also probably point out at this point that between each of these probe launches, the mothership's been doing an orbit. That's why the resource locations keep moving farther and farther away from me, just rapidly. Because obviously after it launches a satellite, by the time I get back to it, it's already gone past, so I just have been flipping it around. But yeah, we launched our final probe and came down for our landing, which is pretty scenic on the way down, but that was about all that interesting that happened. And yeah, it was another 7-10% spot. So looks like we're going to the flats. Cool beans. So our scout mission is complete. Just ignore this is just an old screenshot. That's why the buildings aren't upgraded. But yeah, so because it's 12% in those greater flats, and it's flats, so it makes it really easy to land. Now, the only downside is it's technically also the lowest point on the planet, so it's the furthest distance to get back up to orbit, but it's Minmus, and it really doesn't require a lot of DV to get to orbit, so I'm going to take the easy route, and we are going to build our base in the flats. So now I need to go about designing a rover that is going to house a lot of fuel and also a full-fledged mining and conversion and ore tanks and all that mumbo jumbo. So yeah, we're going to do that. But in order to do that, we need rover wheels. So I quickly realized that we need to go back and buy both the rover wheel updates, and it also gives us the command seat, which is pretty cool, and I end up using. But yeah, so we grabbed those two, and then during the build process, I also realized that I needed the structural pieces, these like panels and stuff like that, for reasons. And I also went over the part count, so we ended up having to come out and upgrade the launch center. So now, to the launch pad. To launch the Goliath Rover! Which actually, it on its own was under the part count, but it was when I added the launcher that I actually went over the part count and had to upgrade building facility or whatever it is. But I also had gave myself the extra challenge to create an SSTO launcher. So that entire launcher bit that you see is actually a single stage. It's going to go all the way to orbit and then turn around and come back down and land near KSP. Mainly because it has 8 mainsails, and then there's actually a twin bore, which is one of the new engines that we bought in the center there. And that is a lot of money, so I just wanted to recover it. But it definitely would have been easier to just do like an asparagus launch. But that's no fun. It's more fun to try and bring it back down. So we're going to be tackling that. And also the rover itself weighed about 60 tons. And that is with only 800 units of fuel. Almost all of its fuel tanks are drained. There's only the MK2 tanks have 800 units of fuel in them. And that's what it needs to do. Well, it's more than it needs to do with its landing, but it's for the landing stage. The rest, everything else is empty, but it weighed 60 tons with that 800 units, so I'm not even sure what it actually weighs with full tanks. So it's a good thing that Minmus has really low gravity. But I'll cover the rover more later. So that middle stage is going to be the Minmus stage. That's our launch to Minmus, do our break, get in orbit, and it'll actually start the descent of our actual rover too. However, we are going to ditch it, and then the rover is going to land on its own. And I did have one problem and one mistake that I made with this. The problem was the launch was actually really tipsy, and the reason for that is it's really top heavy, but it's also the rover. As I was saying, I left the fuel in the MK2 tanks, which are off center from the center of mass of the entire thing. So that was creating an imbalance, which I had to fight, but we eventually got it up to orbit. However, I was really concerned about the amount of fuel left in the launcher because I had to get a really efficient launch to enable myself to have about 200 DV to aim my descent back to KSC with the launcher. And this was one of the attempts that I actually did make it. So you can see here, we are finally up in orbit. And the thing had a weird wiggle problem, so I ended up just disengaging super fast. Because for some reason, the SAS was making it wiggle. And then we flip back over to our launcher and look for KSC. And plotted a burn that was going to use all of our fuel because I don't want to have any of that weight when I come down. Because this thing is heavy and there is a shit ton of parachutes on it. In fact, I didn't even count how many parachutes are on it. It's enough to fill the screen when they deploy, let's just put it that way. Because, yeah, this thing's really heavy. And also, every single time I tested this thing, bringing it back down, if I brought it down engine first, it would make it, but 2 to 4 engines blew up every single time, no matter how much DV I used. I tried using 50, 100, 200, 300, 400. And every single time, didn't matter the trajectory, I lost engines. So I ended up coming up with a trick, which I'm not even sure why it works, but it does, so I'm not going to complain. So you can see we fired our brake, and basically I chucked that piece, and there's a heat shield underneath here. And what that piece was basically just 2 decouplers facing opposite directions, so that it essentially decoupled the decoupler that decoupled the top stage and left behind the heat shield, not the bottom of the decoupler. However, they're on a re-entry path, so they will burn up and die, so I'm not worried about them becoming garbage. And yeah, as long as I brought this thing in head first, which makes no sense, the heat shield seemed to absorb enough of the heat before that happened. At 1800 meters a second, it would flip. However, it safely flipped. It just flipped around and nothing exploded, so I don't care, it works. So we deployed some drogue chutes here to desperately try to slow down, and then we deployed all our main chutes, which, yeah. However, the unfortunate news, which you'll see in a second here, I had only ever tested this thing landing in water. So, boom. When I landed, I lost 3 engines, and I wasn't happy with that. So I actually reloaded the quick save and just tweaked my trajectory so that I'd actually overshoot KSC this time and land in the water. And you can see, just like clockwork, at 1800 meters a second, it flipped again. However, nothing blew up, so yeah. And I ended up using drogue chutes just because this thing had so much mass that it really came screaming down. So I pretty much needed drogue chutes in order to be able to deploy my main chutes. And you can see there, when I pop them, it just completely fills the left side of the screen of the staging sequence with chutes. So this time we actually landed, and I clicked recovery as quick as I could because last time it tipped and exploded, and I didn't want that to happen. So we got our 245 grand back and headed back out to the main mission, our rover, which is peacefully coasting, waiting for its burn. However, I wanted to leave this in because you'll notice when I fire the engines, the nose bucks up on the ship, and that's because of that having that fuel in the MK2 that I was talking about. It was causing a torque that the ship was constantly wanting to like pitch up on me, which made doing the burn actually really annoying because I had to literally fight it. I was constantly tapping the pitch to negate the fact that it was torquing on me. So in hindsight, I really should have put that fuel in the orange tank that's below the MK2 tank, because then that way it would have been more central. But that's hindsight, and I was able to fight it, so whatever. So we finished our burn, plotted our maneuver, and it was about an hour out, so we just said goodbye to Kerbin. Goodbye, Kerbin. And once we got out, we performed our burn, which completely missed, and basically manually tweaked it in. And you can see I'm not coming in on a equilateral orbit here because we're going to want to land in those flats, and the flats aren't actually really on the equator. They're kind of below it, so we're not shooting for a perfect equator. So then we just time warped ourselves out to the SOI and plotted our orbit capture, and then came cruising into Minmus and performed our burn, which, thanks again to that fuel imbalance, caused me to, well, we got orbit capture, which you'll see, whoop, but it's on a very wonky orbit. It was down to like 6,000 or 8,000 or something on the one side, so I was a little concerned about actually crashing. So I decided to, since I had a shit ton of extra fuel that I really didn't need, I just burned on the radial node to kind of get our orbit so it's at least over 10k on each side. And now we need to wait until our landing site comes around, because it's over on the dark side right now, and we're not on a good orbital path to intercept it, and I just don't want to land at night. So we hit the time warp, but I quickly realized it was going to take way too long, so I actually switched over to our polar sat because it has way faster time acceleration, and went woo to spin. It was about a day elapsed, I think, and then finally it was in about the right position, so we flipped back over to our rover and plotted our descent, which, again, thanks to the imbalance, didn't go perfect. But you can see I just kind of warped us closer because the planet was still rotating. But anyway, we executed our burn, and we finally had our trajectory coming down to the flats. So when I tested this rover, it's actually got enough fuel that it could have done the burn that I just did. But because that space stage ended up having extra fuel, I just used it instead. But we could have technically went from a full orbit down. It had enough fuel to actually land completely on its own, but whatever. So we kind of got spun around here, and then I ejected the stage that got us up here. And then you can see I have a probe core buried in the back here. And the reason for that is because our nav wheel is now confused on which way our rocket should be facing. So that probe core gave me the ability to click the control from here, and now the anti-normal is facing the direction I want it to. Because you'll notice after I rotate around, I'm going to flip the camera around here, and you can see our actual landing stage, which is the Werner engines. So I have 6 across the middle in the center of mass, and then I have an additional 4 on either side of the center of mass, equal distance, so that we don't create any, when we fire the engines, we don't create any torque at all. It'll have a nice clean descent. So we're going to go back into fast forward mode here. That part I left in real time. You can see the Werner engine's actually firing there. I spun it around just so you can see. But anyway, I came down for the descent, and I couldn't use time warp, so that's why we put the footage back to time warp. But I wanted to land near that probe just for the hell of it, but I got really distracted by watching that other stage go down and explode, because it completely failed at it. You'll see that when it hits, a piece goes flying off, and just like, I basically started watching that. I was more interested in that than I was the landing. There was a couple times where I was just like, oh crap, I'm in the middle of a landing. I had to like quickly look at all the numbers again and adjust my drop rate or whatever. But I basically just brought it down really nice and gentle. I think I landed at like 1 meter a second, just so that we do have an engineer. I could fix the wheels, but I just didn't want to risk blowing up the wheels. And voila, we are finally here. So we just activated our ore scanners, just to make sure we're over 12%, even though this whole area seems to be 12%. And then I also switched the control back to the MK2 command pod, so our nav wheel fixes itself. And then we just went for a little cruise over to our probe, just because I felt like going for a drive. And this thing is really bad at braking. You'll see I had to put the brakes on really early, although I did actually put RCS thrusters on the front of it, so you can actually use RCS thrusters to help slow it down if you need to brake really fast. However, I don't have any monopropellant fuel on with me right now, so that wasn't an option, so I just had to make sure I stopped early. And I should also point out that I turned off the steering on the middle wheels and back wheels, so only the front wheels were able to steer. And then basically pointed ourselves to 90 degrees so that we were facing east-west because of the way I have the solar panels. I want them to be able to rotate and follow the sun. So now that we have the upgraded building, I have action groups. So I hit number 1, which deployed our radiators and solar panels, and it turned out I needed this many to basically keep the two mine ores going, as well as the refueling plant. So you can see when we zoom in here, you can see that's the refueling plant in the middle there. And I think I turned the lights on here, yeah, so you can actually see better. So we got a couple capulas at the end just for fun, and the refueling center is in the middle, and that base is basically made up of 3 orange tanks running all beside each other. And then on top of that is an MK2 fuselage, which runs the entire length of the ship. And then you can also see on the sides there we have ore tanks that also run beside the MK2 pod and all the way down, and then I kind of just covered them with radiators. And on the front we have a claw so that it can drive over and attach to vehicles that need refueling. And then on the back, you'll see I finally pop out one of our guys here. And I built a nice little ramp. However, our Kerbal does not know how to walk, so she was, for some reason, unable to actually use said ramp because she just kept flopping around. So I finally gave up and just used RCS. You can see those ore tanks running there now, kind of. And they're basically supporting this section, which is just a giant bus, kind of. So a whole bunch of Kerbals could actually sit up here and go for a cruise with the rover. And I also built this thing at the back here, which is, as the Kerbal falls all over it, it's basically just all of our science experiments, and then it's also got our comms. There's a fuel cell on the top of it there, just in case. And I think that's, we technically have atmosphere scanners, which there's no atmosphere here, but I just thought they looked cool, so I put them there for the hell of it. So yeah, this is our rover. It's capable of, I think it was 14 Kerbals can technically fit on this thing, and it could cruise around. And then you can just suck in all those radiators and solar panels if you need to drive around. But yeah, I ended up, I took some science experiments. I didn't transmit them just because I'm going to be bringing a science lab with the base. So I want science here that I can actually put into the science lab. So I'll probably just actually dispose of those, but anyway, having enough fun running around out there, we went and reboarded. And yeah, this is our wonderful mining rover that actually handles really well. So the stat breakdown, it can hold 1,000 mono, 13,000 units of fuel. It's got 16,000 battery and can hold 2,400 ore. So it'll easily be able to refuel any ships that come here and has lots of storage to save up and everything else. And the 16,000 battery is crucially important because if we hit the time warp here, you'll see that when we get to nighttime, it takes 14,000 energy to get through the night and keep the 2 drills and the 2.5 meter refinery plant running. So you'll see once night hits, the energy starts plummeting and it'll get down to about 2,000, and then the sun will come back up and everything will just fill back up. So this way we can have a 24-hour mining process and it can always be making fuel for us. So aside from power, the other major thing with mining is you need to deal with thermal efficiency, which is basically these drills and the ore plant will actually generate heat. And if you don't have enough radiators, it will cause everything to overheat. So what I'm actually going to do, just to kind of show this, is I'm going to retract all these radiators. And you can see here, these things already have some heat in them because I just shut them off, but you can see that heat's dropping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the drills and the plant, and you will notice these core temperatures will start to climb. And because I've got rid of all the radiators, actually let's just retract these two, because that way, oh no, that'll toggle the drills. No, okay, I lied, we're not going to do that. Sorry. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit the key that's going to start the drills and the refinery plant. You'll see these temperatures will start to climb, and you can see this thermal efficiency. So basically, once this core temperature gets to 500K and 1000K, the thermal efficiency will be 100%. However, in the case here, we'll just time warp this. So you can see we're getting near our peaks. Now you can see how it's actually gotten past the peak, and the efficiency went up to 100%, and now it's dropping. So you can see it's starting to go down. This guy's still not capped out, but you can see over here how this guy's the thermal efficiency is dropping because it's essentially overheating. We're not dissipating enough heat. So, and now this guy's doing it too. So the trick to mining is you need to make sure that you have enough radiators that basically those will get to 100% and sit there. So you can see if I start putting these radiators back out, you should see the temperatures will start dropping back down, and they'll essentially will drop to 100%, so they'll drop to 100% thermal efficiency there. And now you can see it's just holding, so it's not going up or down in temperature, and it's just running at 100%. And if we time warp this other guy, it should do the same. And that is definitely, other than the power, obviously, because you need enough power to keep things running 24/7, this is the other big requirement of mining. Man, that thing takes a while to get going. Is that you need to have these thermal efficiencies. Basically, you want to try and keep them at 100%, so you need to ensure that you have enough radiators to dissipate enough heat that these things will get up to temperature and just sit there and just hang out. So you can, obviously I did some testing to make sure I would have enough radiators and stuff like that, so yeah, that's basically all there really is to mining, is you need to make sure you have enough power to survive the day and the night, so you can do 24-hour manufacturing. And you need to have enough radiators that you can dissipate all the heat so everything runs at 100%. And then the last thing that I should mention is you can see here, Curlian is an engineer, and I think, does it even say here? Yes, you can see how our effects say increases resource converter efficiency and increases drill efficiency. So by having an engineer on the craft, we are essentially creating fuel faster than we would if we didn't have an engineer. And basically, because she's 1 star, that's going to give us a multiplier that's going to increase the efficiency of everything. Now, if she was, depending how many stars they have, is how much it actually boosts it. So if you have a 5-star, she'll actually boost it a ton. Ours are unfortunately only 1 star, but it still gives a multiplier, so there's still a really good thing to have. So, pro tip, when it comes to mining, make sure you have enough power to survive the night and the day, and make sure you have enough radiators to dissipate the heat, and make sure you have an engineer with you because they can boost the efficiency of the whole operation. So, other than that, I think I want to go for a bit of a cruise, so I'm going to do that. Just cuz. So we're going to use our wonderful action groups, which are going to suck in all our rads and solar panels and drills, and we are ready to go for a bomb. And this is sped up footage, so now we're going to cut back to the live. So you can see by how long it took. It takes this thing a long time to get any speed going. These wheels aren't the greatest thing in the world, and I have them tilted, which probably isn't the best thing, but I thought it made it look a lot cooler, so whatever. But I thought I'd briefly show you also up here we have a whole bunch of RCS thrusters, and that's essentially to help out braking. So if I turned on RCS and hit the N key, you can see those all fire up and they actually assist in braking. So you can not only use your brakes, but you can actually use the RCS thrusters to also help slow you down, because this thing is a hog. It takes a really long time to brake. However, I want to test out and make sure that this thing I just want to see how well this thing actually handles hills. So I think what we might do is I'm going to go for a bomb over here and go cruise around on those hills and see if I can actually make it up the hills. So this drive took a really long time, so we're going to kind of just hypercut it, because even at fast forward, it still takes a long time. But basically what I learned is it can get up to about a top speed of about 15 meters a second on the flats here. That's pretty much where it caps out, and it's sitting on about 400 units of fuel right now. So it barely has any fuel in it at all. If you had a bunch of fuel, I doubt it would even get going that fast. But you can see even when we're gunning the throttle, our battery does not even go down at all. That's why I have the solar panels running down the side so that it can still get power even without the main solar panels sticking out. But you can see here we hit the hill and it was about a 12-degree slope, and I was able to maintain pretty much 12 meters a second going up the slope. And when I went from that hill to the next hill, it was about a 20-degree slope, and it was still able to maintain about 10 meters a second even on the 20-degree slope. So it seems like this thing would actually be able to climb quite a few hills. In fact, I wouldn't mind going out and testing something steeper than a 20-degree, but it does take a really long time to drive around in this thing. It is slow. So you can see here we finally were coming up and cresting the top of the hill that I kind of set as my challenge to see if I could get up it. And I had no problems at all. The thing actually handles really well. It steers really well, mainly because I only have 2-wheel steering. When you have all 6 steering, it's really oversensitive. And you can see here it was taking too long to brake, so I pulled a U-turn to kind of just slow it down. And then just for fun, I wanted to see if I could basically hop back over to where we were mining before, just to see if this thing was actually capable of doing kind of like suborbital hops. I pretty much assumed it would be, but I just wanted to test it just for fun. So you can see here I switched the control back to the probe core so that our nav wheel was set for flight mode, I guess you could call it. And basically just kind of kept giving it gas until I roughly thought we were coming in close to our probe, and then we spun around and started braking. And it handled the hop no problem at all. So you can see we're finally gonna come down eventually here. This thing does take quite a while to decelerate, so you do want to leave yourself quite a bit of room to actually slow down, but came down for a nice soft landing and put our control back to the MK2, and we're able to drive back over to our probe. But that's no fun. So I reloaded the quick save at the top of the hill, and just for shits and giggles, I wanted to see how fast this thing could actually get going down the hill. Because suborbitals are fun, but it's way more fun to actually drive down a hill. And I was pretty confident it would end in disaster, but that's what quick saves are for, and disasters are fun. So we basically started bombing down the hill here, and I got up to about 30 meters a second before I kind of caught like a little bit of a bump in the hill, and that's when everything went catastrophically wrong. Although, to be honest, once it hit the 30 meters a second, it became really difficult to steer. Like if you turned the wheel at all, it just started to violently shoot in directions, and there you can see it finally hit the bump, and kaboom! We created a giant debris field. However, even though pretty much the entire craft exploded, or at least all the extremities, you can see here the MK2 fuselage and cockpit are still in one piece, and our pilots are getting a really interesting view as they go tumbling down this hill. But I was really curious if it actually survive and not kill our Kerbals, so I kind of let this play out while I just listened and watched all the debris around us explode in fiery deaths of oblivion. And you can see here it finally actually survived. I mean, it pretty much blew everything off. There was only the fuselage left, but it was in one piece. And just so that you can have a visual, it does have lights on it, so this is what it looks like at nighttime. However, you cannot leave the lights on without the refinery plant running out of power. So it's one or the other. You can either run the refining process through the night, or you can have lights on through the night, but you can't have both. It'll kill the batteries. And as a final bonus, I thought I'd show some making of video or pictures. So here's what it looks like without all the crap laying on top of it. You can see that fuse, the MK2 running along there. Then we added the ore tanks, and then we added all the radiators and paneling. And then finally the coach area and solar panels. And this is a nice side view. You can see that how the orange tank is kind of merged into the MK2 tank to give it a nice shape. And the back end, nice kind of far away view from up top. And here's the bottom, so you can see the next shot here. You can see all our burner engines and everything that we used for the landing. And I will also point out that the MK2 pod is technically merged into that orange tank, so we are using clipped fuel tanks. I know that's a big no-no, but I just thought it made a really cool shape, and I just really don't care. So, too bad for you. Right, so I think we're going to call it a wrap here for this episode, and we now have an ore operation going on Minmus. Sweet! But I now have a whole bunch of work ahead of me because I still do have the mission to put a base there, and I still want to put a base there, but I imagine it's going to be like that rover, and I'm probably going to over-engineer the shit out of it just to make it look cool and just to have some fun. Because why not? The challenge is fun, and it'll be neat to have a really big base out there. So, until next episode, which will probably be sending the actual base there, with the 5 to 6 hours of me designing it cut out. But until then, ta-ta!